Amen. Can y'all hear me okay? I figured I didn't need to be mic'd up. That's kind of a joke to think I need to be mic'd up. I also was about to bring that chair up here, but I was not going to end up sitting down. Anyway, Luke chapter 19, verses 1 through 10. Luke 19, 1 through 10. That's where we're going today. And to start us out, I want to tell you about my phone experience yesterday. I went yesterday and finally bought the bullet and bought a new phone. And I've been fighting that for about 4 months now because my old phone, I could charge it to 100% and then 2 hours later it would just die. Like just die. Like it would say it had 45% battery and it would just die on me in the middle of a text message. So finally I was like, I've got to get a new phone. Well, I think the reason that I kill cell phones so quickly is because I'm always using it. I'm either using it to go running with, I'm using it to like when I'm out cleaning cars or mowing grass, I'm listening to stuff, I'm texting on it, I'm talking on it, I'm on social media. I probably use the phone a little too much. But since I use the phone in environments where I'm like sweating, I get real, y'all know I got the OCD thing going on, well I get real OCD about that. And so we've got these little Clorox bleach things at home, little wipes, and they say they kill like 99.9% of germs and bacteria, even the flu. And so I was like, okay, what I'll do is after I'm done running, every time I'm done running or outside with the phone, I'll just wipe it down. I mean, the 0.1%, that's fine. That builds up immunity. I was okay with that. And so I always wipe my phone down, and I'm thinking, okay, the phone's clean. The phone is clean every night before I go to bed. Wipe it down, real OCD about it. Colleen makes fun of me. It's okay. I'm getting over it. But yesterday, I'm in the Apple store, and I'm going to trade that phone in. And so they're like, okay, well, can I see the phone? And I have the phone in this OtterBox. And y'all are going to think it's gross that I'm holding it in just a second. But I had the phone in this OtterBox. And they're like, okay, well, let me take the phone out of the OtterBox and check the serial number, see how much money we can give you for it. I was like, okay, that sounds good. And so as she takes the phone out of the OtterBox, I'm like, what is that smell? I mean, I think this lady might have, I'm just like, what? I don't know what happened here. Like, just something just stank. And I was like, okay, well, she goes, okay, well, I don't need this, and hands me the OtterBox. And I go, okay. And I'm holding the OtterBox kind of like this, and I look down, and it's wet inside. And I'm like, what is that? And then I do one of these numbers, I go, oh, I mean, like, and then I look at Colleen and I go, smell this. She thought that was disgusting and she wouldn't touch it or my hand for the rest of the night. And so I started thinking about that on the way home because my deal with the OCD and the phone and the cleaning thing, I was like, I've got to keep it clean, so I'm going to wipe it down. I'm going to make sure it gets clean and all that stuff. But then what I didn't realize was it was still nasty. Like that was weeks old damp sweat behind my phone and just stunk. But I started thinking about that. We were driving home from dinner last night. Colleen and I had date night. We were driving home from dinner, and I'm just thinking about that kind of experience. And I started thinking about how that's such a picture of how so many of us, so many people who spend their lives in church operate. Because we'll believe the lie that what we need to do is to just clean up the outside. We just need to clean up the outside, which means we dress a certain way, we talk a certain way, we look a certain way. We got to make sure everything looks in order on the outside. But see, no matter how hard we try to clean up ourselves, there's always going to be something nasty there. There's always going to be something there that doesn't line up. There's going to be something there that's amiss. That's the truth. That's what the Bible teaches us. In fact, I want to show you guys this. Before we get to Luke chapter 19, I want to read to you the 2 verses after John chapter 3, verse 16. Now, John 3:16, many of us know those verses, right? For God so loved the world, He gave His one and only Son. Whoever believes in Him shall not perish, but have everlasting life. Like most of us know that verse. That's a very well-known verse out of the Bible. But the 2 verses that follow it are very fascinating, and I want to read them to you right now. They say this. This is John 3:17 and 18. It says, for God did not send His Son into the world to condemn the world, but in order that the world might be saved through Him. We'll come back to that in just a second. But look at 18. It says, whoever believes in Him is not condemned. That's great news, but look at this. But whoever does not believe is condemned already because he has not believed in the name of the only Son of God. Notice it says, but whoever does not believe. Whether or not this is your first time in a church building or you grew up in church, like you were born in church. Whether or not you struggle in this area or you've never even thought about that as a temptation. Whether or not you've got all sorts of baggage and you've got all these things that you don't want to come out of the closet or you've been perfect in your mind since day one. It says, whoever, because the truth of the Bible is this. We've all sinned. We've all sinned. And what sin is simply a rebellion against God. We see what God has told us to do and we don't do it. And we see what God has told us not to do and we do that. Every person in this room is guilty. It says whoever. But see, that's not where the story ends. That's not where the story ends. And please hear me say this morning. I never want anybody to come into a body church environment and think that's the period at the end of the sentence. Like, you sinned. Have a great Sunday afternoon. Like, that just stinks, right? Like, why are we celebrating? Why do we have hope? Because the rest of these two verses tells us that Jesus didn't come into the world to condemn us. He came into the world because we're sinful and we stand condemned already, and He wants to save us from that. See, that's the central message of the Bible. That's the good news that we share every single week. Now, some of you are sitting in here and you go, well, Jason, I've heard this before. This just kind of seems like kind of a scare tactic to get my attention. Listen, you know what some sort of like unnecessary scare is? That's paying $10.50 to go see some sort of horror movie. You know what I'm saying? Like, you go, these crazy scary movies come out, you go spend 2 hours, and for the next 3 months you don't sleep at all. Like, does anybody else have that experience? I went and saw, I think it was What Lies Beneath in 8th grade. Didn't sleep for 6 months. Like, not only had the bathroom light on, but had the fan in the bathroom on. That's being scared unnecessarily. But see, what we understand about the Bible is the Bible comes to us to tell us these things because they're true. And we need to hear them. But see, there's such good news when we recognize that. What we're going to look at today is in Luke chapter 19, like I told you guys, we're going to look at the story of Zacchaeus. Now, I know half of you in this room can sing a song, and I'm going to refrain because I don't want it to get stuck in your head. But Zacchaeus, he is an excellent example of somebody who realized he was broken. Like, Zacchaeus realized there's something wrong with me, and he began to see John 3:17 and 18 come to life in his own life. He said, hey, I've messed up. I'm not perfect. I've got a lot of baggage, like maybe many of us in this room today. But then he said, there's something different about Jesus. There's something different about this man that I've heard about that I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get in front of him so that I can see if he's truly like everyone says. So, that's where we're going to be today, is in Luke 19, verses 1 through 10. And we're going to take it apart in 4 points. So, if you're taking notes, our first point is this: the price paid. The price paid. Luke chapter 19, verses 1 and 2 say this. He, being Jesus, entered Jericho and was passing through. And behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. He was a chief tax collector and he was rich. Now let me set the stage here. If you've been with us at all, you know that we as a church have been journeying through the book of Mark. And last time we were in the book of Mark, it was the last Sunday in April, and we talked about blind Bartimaeus, blind Bart. And this story, as recorded by Luke, is not recorded by Mark, but happens about the same time as the blind Bartimaeus story. So this is just a week and a half before Jesus' death. These are the final hours of Jesus' life, and he's in Jericho on his way to Jerusalem. So if you only had 10 days to live, wouldn't you spend your time in very important ways? Wouldn't you cut out all the fat and just spend the time doing what you wanted to do? So when Jesus, we look at the last 10 days of his life, the last 2 weeks of his life, the things he does and the way he spends his time is very intentional. Keep that in mind as we see who he's about to hang out with. So, everything has a cost. In order to obtain something, you usually, if not always, almost always have to give something up. I'll give you an example. Colleen and I, when we were first married, this was before we had kids and we could do some things like this, we decided it would be a lot of fun to hop on I-40 and to drive to California. You can really get on I-40 and just go all the way to California, which is what we did. It was a long drive. And it was great. On the way out there, it's like, oh my gosh, the scenery's changing. You get to New Mexico and Arizona. But then on the way back, you're in Oklahoma and it's all flat. And you're like, just get me home. Can I get out of the car and you just knock me out and put me in the trunk and just wake me up when we get home? It was so painful on the way back. Drive out there, fly back. That's my suggestion. But on our way back, we went through Las Vegas and then we went to see the Grand Canyon. We drove over the Hoover Dam and then went to the Grand Canyon. And so many people had told us about the Grand Canyon Skywalk. The Grand Canyon Skywalk. Chelsea, can you put that picture of the Grand Canyon Skywalk up there? That is the Grand Canyon Skywalk. That is a platform that juts out over the Grand Canyon, and the floor of that, what those people are standing on, is glass. So if you look down, all you see is 4,000 feet of air and then the bottom of the canyon. And so they even make you put on these like little slippers, like these surgical slippers, so you don't scuff up the glass. But we thought, oh, that sounds awesome. Let's go to the Grand Canyon Skywalk. Well, we drive past the Hoover Dam, take I think it was a left, and drive up the side of a mountain for about 2 hours. Like dirt road, yielding for cattle multiple times. Like this is kind of the way you get to that. And so we're thinking, okay, but it's going to be worth it. It's going to be worth it. It's going to be worth it. So we pay all this time to get up there, finally get to the top. The Grand Canyon is like a half a mile away. We know we're so close. And so we go into the gift shop and we're like, all right, we want to see the skywalk. You know, we figured it was like a national park thing or something, like you pay $5 and go see it. Like, okay, well, we have a couple different packages for you to see the skywalk. The first package is $40 per person, and you don't get to see the skywalk at that point. Like, why would I come up here and pay $40 and not see the skywalk? And I was like, well, how much is to see the skywalk? Oh, it's about $80 per person. Now, this is me, just in seminary, no job, $80 a person. And I'm just like, what do you mean? And they're like, well, for $340, you can have your own private VIP tour and a guide tell you all about the canyon. I'm like, no, I don't want that. And so we're sitting there, but they guide you. Like, what are you going to do, drive back down the mountain and not see the thing? Like, that's not an option. And so we're like, fine, here's our money, run our credit card. And so we go see it. And I'm standing there, but I'm mad. Like, I'm on that thing, and I'm like, yeah, this is fine. I want my $160 back. Colleen won't even go out on it. Like, whatever. Anyway, I'm not bitter. But the point of that was, in order for me to do that, I had to pay something. And there was a financial cost. There was a financial cost. Now, there's costs associated with things that aren't necessarily financial. Like you get married, there's a relational cost. You're pouring a lot of time, energy, and effort into that relationship. You have kids, there's a cost of sleep. There's a cost of sanity, really. Like, you know, people look at parents and they're like, why are they so weird? It's because of their kids. Like, I get that. And I love my kids. But they were normal before you showed up. But the deal is like everything we do has a cost. You do one thing, you get one thing, you give something up to get it. Now I want you to see that with Zacchaeus. Because the Bible tells us something. The Bible tells us that Zacchaeus, it says, he was rich. And that, I think we can look at that and glance over and not think much about it. But the Bible is trying to tell us something. This dude had wealth. Like he had more wealth than probably any of us in this room. Maybe most of us put together. Because see, here's what Zacchaeus did. Zacchaeus had a job. He was a chief tax collector. Not just a tax collector, but he was like one of a few people who were in charge of the region. And so what a tax collector would do in that day is the Roman government came in and occupied Israel. And the Roman government would hire people who were from that region to collect taxes on behalf of the Roman government. So you're already working with the enemy and taking money from your neighbors and your countrymen to support the government. But the way a tax collector would get paid, I don't think they were on salary. The way they would get paid is they would collect a little extra and put it in their pocket. So the government says, hey, I need you to go get $100 from this person, and I go up to that person and I get $300. Well, I give the Roman government their 100 and put the 200 in my pocket. And it was perfectly legal because the government didn't care how I collected their share. And so what would happen is I would show up at your door with the full force of the Roman government behind me, and you'd have to give me what I asked for. And everybody knew what this was happening. And so Zacchaeus, he wasn't just one of those guys. He was in charge of those guys. Like money was just flowing in. He could buy whatever he wanted. He could do whatever he wanted with his money. He was wealthy, but it had a cost. In order to obtain all of that wealth, Zacchaeus, it cost him greatly. It cost him relationally. Everybody hated him. We're going to see that in a minute. Everybody hated Zacchaeus. Everybody looked at Zacchaeus like he was just scum. They looked at him as like a traitor. Even his employers, the Roman government, looked at him as scum because they're like, what kind of a person would turn their back on their people to do this? They just looked, nobody liked the guy. It would have cost him greatly religiously because he was stealing. He wasn't going to Old Testament church. He wasn't rolling in there and everybody was like, what's up, Zacchaeus? Like, no, that was not happening at all. This dude was lonely. This dude was hated. This dude was broken because, see, his wealth cost him everything else. But what this is showing us, and remember this for the end, if you're taking notes, I want you to write this down. Money was the most important thing in Zacchaeus' life. Money was the most important thing in Zacchaeus' life. Money had become Zacchaeus' God. In effect, Zacchaeus said, I don't want to worship God, I want to worship money. Like, that was it. And he's like, I'm going to give up whatever it costs to get this money. And that's how Zacchaeus operated. But we shouldn't look at Zacchaeus so negatively, because we can be just like him. And it might not be with money. It might be with money, but it might not be with money. Natalie Portman, many of you know who she is. She is an actress. And back in 2010, she won, I guess, the Best Actress Oscar for her role in Black Swan. It was a movie, I didn't see it, I just know she won it. And she recently was told, talking to, I guess it was somebody interviewing her, and was talking about the fact that she was reading her son the story of Abraham. And she all of a sudden started thinking about how that little Oscar, this little golden image, could just be like an idol in the Old Testament. And all of a sudden she started talking about how this Oscar can function as an idol. See, it's just a little gold statue, but for so many people, that can be their God. For so many people, wealth can be their God. For so many people, status can be their God. Family can be their God. You know, substance can be your God. And how you know you've got an idol in your life is all of a sudden you start to give up everything else to get that thing. Just like Zacchaeus. He started giving up relationships, he gave up his faith, he gave up everything because he wanted money. And the question is, what is it that you're giving up everything else for to get? Because an idol run amok will take everything from you. It'll take everything from you. And you'll find yourself in a situation like Zacchaeus. And so what is it for you? Is there an idol in your life? Is there a God you're worshiping other than Jesus? Zacchaeus was. But let's see what Zacchaeus does. Let's go to point number 2, looking for Jesus. Looking for Jesus. Luke 19, 3-4 says this. And he, Zacchaeus, was seeking to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd he could not, because he was small in stature. He was a short dude. So he ran on ahead of the crowd, ran ahead and climbed up into a sycamore tree to see him. For Jesus was about to pass that way. I'm really struggling not to sing a song. I'm not going to. But I gotta love Zacchaeus. He's just determined. He's got that determination. Gotta love it. I can relate. A couple weeks ago, I guess it was about 2 weeks ago, my family packed up and we went to Florida. And we were going to drive. And my wife drives a boat, a land yacht, a Yukon, and I think it gets like, no joke, I filled it up last time, it was getting like 10.5 miles to the gallon. I'm just like, if you could watch the needle, it'd be easier to count gallons per miles in that thing. So I asked my mom, I was like, my mom's got a smaller SUV. I was like, can we take your car? It'll get better gas mileage. She's like, sure, you can take my car. But see, the problem was, we have 2 little people, and little people don't pack little. Like, little people need, like, the whole house to come with you. Me, I can live out of a duffel bag for a month. I need, like, 3 pairs of clothes, some detergent, and a bathtub. I don't even need a washing. I just get in the bathtub and just turn it. Like, I'm fine with that. Some of you think that's disgusting, but that's okay. I remember the OtterBox story. But the deal is, I'm like, okay, so we can still do this. We're going to save a lot of money on gas. This will be great. And so we start to pack things into this car, and it becomes apparent very quickly this is going to be tight. And so I'm starting to pack things in, and keep in mind, my wife's Yukon is right next to us in the carport. Like, daunting me, like, it'd be so much easier just to pack. And I'm like, no! And so I'm throwing things in the back of it, and she's got one of those, like, automatic lift gates that close. So Avery's out there helping me, and then I notice she grabs some chalk, and she starts trying to write on the bumper of my mom's car. Sorry, Mom. And I'm like, no, don't do that. And so I'm pressing the button, and so the lift gate's closing, and I'm like, come on. And it gets to the very bottom, and goes, beep, beep, beep. And I was like, no! Like, come on, shut. And so I'm taking things out. I unpacked a box of diapers and put the diapers in individually because I could fit them in little holes as opposed to having the box in there. And so finally, after about 20 minutes, Colleen's just sitting there going, oh man. And so I push it and it closes. And I'm like, yeah, victory, yes. And so when I think about determination, I get it, right? And some of you, you've got that mindset. Like, you set your mind to something, it's happening. Like, get out of my way, it's happening. So it was with Zacchaeus. See, Zacchaeus had all this wealth, but he was broken, and he heard about Jesus, and he wanted to see who Jesus was. and he didn't care what the obstacle was to get him to Jesus. Like some of us, it rains, and we're like, no, I'm not going to go to church today. Zacchaeus is like, no, I'm going to get in front of Jesus, whatever it takes. So he climbs a tree. Now we look at that and we go, that's kind of interesting. In that culture, that was a really big deal, because it was a very high honor culture. Meaning that men don't climb trees. Kids climb trees. Like, it'd be a little weird if you walked out of the door and I was just up in one of the trees. Like, you'd think that was a little strange. In this culture, people were looking at Zacchaeus, they're like, oh, he's a thief and he has no honor. Like, that's what it cost Zacchaeus. But see, we know people hated Zacchaeus because people wouldn't move out of the way for him. Like, if there's somebody who's standing in front of you, like this tall, does that impede your vision at all? No, but nobody wanted to move because nobody liked Zacchaeus. Nobody liked Zacchaeus. So he climbs up in the tree and he wants to see Jesus. But as I was thinking about this, and as I was just kind of unpacking this and praying through this message, I feel like there's probably some people in this room who feel a lot like Zacchaeus did. Because if Zacchaeus would have just allowed the crowd to shape his view of Jesus, he would have never come to Jesus. Because these are all Jesus fans. Like, they've got this song, yay, we love Jesus, woo! Like, that's this crowd's mentality. But they don't want to have anything to do with Zacchaeus. Now, is that anybody's story in this room? Don't raise your hand. But when you think about church and churched people, do you feel like there's they look at you and they go, well, he can't be here, she can't be here. We know what they did. Don't let the crowd shape your view of who Jesus is. Don't let your run-ins with churched Christians shape your view of who Jesus is. I love what Zacchaeus does. He goes, I know you guys hate me and think I'm scum. I want to know what Jesus thinks of me. And one of the reasons I love planting a church is I know that some of the reason that some of you are probably here is because at your old church, your old religious organization, this was the perception that you had of Christians. But hear me say this right now. I want a church full of Zacchaeuses. I want a church full of people who've got baggage. I want a church full of people who are struggling right now. None of us in this room are perfect. And the reason churches, I believe, find themselves in trouble isn't because they're full of imperfect people. It's because they're full of imperfect people trying to act perfect. That's a treadmill that nobody gets off in. You know what happens when you run on a treadmill and you stop? You're in the same place. And when you play that game, you're in the same place. You're not moving forward. Mm-hmm. And so let me say this. I've had conversations with people too. They'll be like, well, I just don't like organized religion. I don't like organized religion. And I get that because sometimes the organized religion looks like the crowd. And so if you're here this morning and that's your story, the invitation I want you to hear the Bible giving you is one that says, come see who Jesus is. I know you've probably got stories about church people. Come see who Jesus is. Don't let all of us messed up people scare you away from our perfect Savior. Because look at what happens. I believe that this took everybody by surprise. Point 3, a surprise encounter. I think this took everybody by surprise. Look at verse 5. And when Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry down. Hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. So Jesus is walking along the parade route. Everybody's excited about Jesus. He makes a beeline for the sycamore tree, looks up in the tree and says, hey, Zacchaeus, get down from the tree. I'm coming home with you today. Look at this. So Zacchaeus, he hurried and came down and received him joyfully. And when they saw it, the crowd, all grumbled. He has gone in to be the guest of a man who is a sinner. Now, in our culture, I don't think we quite comprehend exactly what this means. Because in our culture, we think about somebody coming over, and that's cool or whatever. But we've got to understand how big of a deal this was that Jesus said, Zacchaeus, I'm coming home with you today. In college, I roomed with a guy named Ned Reynolds. That was his name. And we lived together for 2 years, my sophomore and junior year. We knew each other really well freshman year. Real good friend of mine. He was in my wedding. Still talk to him all the time today. But Ned said, we sat down with one of our friends and we did an interview with them. They were in like a psychology class or something and wanted to do an interview and write a paper on roommates and kind of the roommate dynamic. And so he asked the two of us to do it because we're a little bit different in the way that our personalities are, so he thought it would be interesting. And so he sat down and started asking us questions, and one of the questions he asked Ned surprised me because I didn't see Ned's answer coming. But he asked Ned, he goes, "Hey Ned, what about living with Jason shocked you the most?" And he said, "Well, I knew Jason freshman year, and he was just crazy. Like, take this and put it in college. Like, just, woo, how's it going?" Like, that was just me by default. Like, that's just how I wake up in the morning. Well, it takes about an hour to warm up to get there, but I'm there all the way till bedtime. And so Ned thought that, like, living with me was going to be that on steroids. Like, I was just going to be, like, people always in our apartment. He didn't know who any of them were. Like, it was just a constant, like, strobe lights, fog, and, like, you know, techno music. Like, that's what his impression of living with me, that's what he thought it was going to be like. But he says, I was so shocked because what ended up happening was when I moved in with Jason, I began to realize something. That he views his house as a place where he turns all of that off and he's hanging out with people and just being real and low-key. And I never thought about that because I'm always like going into other people's apartments, but I'm never like, hey, come over to mine, because when I'm in my apartment, when I'm in my house, I'm just me. And so if we're hanging out in my house, like, I consider you a very close friend. Like, I consider that, there's none of the, woo, so excited you're here today in my house. Like, I'm just kind of hanging out. And then I began to realize, like, I kind of viewed that the same way this culture viewed hanging out in people's houses like that. Like when you go over to somebody's house, that's not just, hey, what's up? I got something I want to talk to you about. It's like, I approve of you. I care about you. I love you. We're in deep relationship. And so when Jesus looked at Zacchaeus and said, I'm staying with you tonight, it wasn't, hey, Jesus needed a meal from the wealthy guy in town. It was, Zacchaeus, I love you. I'm becoming friends with you. We're entering into relationship together. That's why the crowd in verse 7 goes, what in the world is going on here? Like, the crowd looks shocked because it doesn't make sense when you view yourself as someone who needs to earn God's favor. Because when you view yourself as somebody who needs to earn God's favor and you see somebody freely receive it, knowing how messed up they are, it blows up your worldview. It makes you go, what in the world? But see, that's what Jesus does time and time again. Jesus will constantly go to broken people who need a Savior and say, I love you and I'm going to begin to change you. And see, as I think about our church, I just want our church full of those type of people. People who are open with their brokenness, people who've got baggage, but people who've said yes to Jesus and He's changing them. And He's beginning to make them new, and He's beginning to make them into a new person. And so if you're in here, know that Jesus' love for you is not predicated on your behavior. It's not. Jesus' salvation is predicated on His behavior on the cross when He died for you. And so that blows up everybody's minds. But see, it doesn't just stop there. I love that this story doesn't just stop there. Let's go to verse 4. It says this, a changed man. A changed man. Luke chapter 19, verses 8 through 9 say this. And Zacchaeus stood and said to the Lord, Behold, Lord, the half of my goods I give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. And Jesus said to him, Today salvation has come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham. Now, I was, in thinking about purchasing this new phone, I just was kind of thinking about the idea of upgrading to phones, right? Or upgrading anything in life. Think about when the iPhone 5S came out, or that new car that you bought came out, and how excited you were to go and get it, right? Like, I love when the new phones come out because there's always stories on the news of like people lining the streets in front of the Apple store to get like the first phone, or when the watch came out doing the same thing. Or, when that new car caught your eye at the dealership, you're like, man, can I do this with zero down and finance it for like 150 months? Like, you're just like, let's just make this thing happen. Like, you're so excited about it. But inevitably, a couple months later, a couple years later, what happens? You're going to the Apple store to trade in your old phone to get a new one. But see, why would you do that? Because you were so excited about the old phone. You were so excited about the old car. You were so excited about the old thing that you had. The reason you're doing that is because in your mind, you found something better. The reason you're willing to give up the thing that you wanted so much is because you found something better. Now, let's take that to Zacchaeus. What did we say earlier was Zacchaeus' God? It was his money. Zacchaeus gave up relationships, religion. He was a hated man because he said, money is the most important thing. Now, what did Zacchaeus just do in verses 8 and 9? He looked at Jesus and he said, I'm giving away my money. Now, what would cause Zacchaeus to give away the most important thing in his life? He had found something better. He had found something better. He met Jesus.